Welcome to Better Than We Found It, the podcast that goes inside the minds of the leaders building our future.
The difficult we do today, the impossible we do tomorrow.
I'm Josh Huggins, founder of GS2, a search firm dedicated to finding the visionaries powering the most critical shift of our time, the US energy transition.
So much of what I do is passion driven because of those experiences.
This season, we're tracing the unique journeys of the architects of America's new energy landscape, exploring how their diverse backgrounds forged the psychology, the ambition, and the brutal truths required to lead in a time of unprecedented change.
If you're going to be an entrepreneur, you got to be a risk taker, and you got to be able to take calculated risk.
My mission is to uncover the playbook of the leaders in the industry, so we can all learn what it takes to build a world that's truly better than we found it.
So today's guest is a leader who proves that the most powerful skill in a technical world isn't engineering, it's storytelling. Irfan Bharde is the SVP and Chief Commercial Officer at NovaSource Power Services, one of the world's largest O&M service providers for solar and storage assets. His journey, it's a masterclass in cross-industry leadership with a career spanning traditional power at GE, industrial automation at Honeywell, and robotics and AI at Domatic. He was brought into NovaSource as part of a new leadership team with a clear mission to transform the company and bring a mature, process-driven playbook to the rapidly growing renewables industry. And today, we get into that incredible story. The transformation from engineer to storyteller, the outsider's advantage of bringing lessons from other industries into renewables, and his vision for a future of total asset optimization. So let's dive right in. So Irfan, welcome to Better Than We Found It.
Thank you, Josh. Glad to be here.
Yeah, very much looking forward to this one. So for those listening that might not know who you are or your background, I have done a quick intro, but I'm sure I didn't do it justice. So would you mind explaining who you are, your role in your current organization?
Sure. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer for NovaSource Power Services, and we provide operations and maintenance services to solar and battery storage plants.
Excellent. Well, I'm looking forward to getting into it in more detail. But I think what stood out to me first when we had our initial conversation and looking through your background was the fact that your career and life has been truly global. You mentioned that obviously speaking a number of different languages, which be great if you could explain which languages you speak and how you came to speak them, and the multicultural elements that have formed part of that have been crucial to your leadership success. So tell me more about your leadership philosophy because of that, and maybe the key point of listening more and speaking less.
Yeah, being kind of multicultural here, I grew up in Pakistan, so my native language is Urdu. I moved to the US when I was 7 and had to learn English from scratch. So growing up in the US, being such a big country, you're exposed to different states, different cultures. So learning a new language, new environment, still holding on to my roots of learning Urdu and keeping that, still going. It's been really refreshing to understand different cultures. So, when I was in high school, I took French. When I started career, I had the opportunity to work for multiple different companies. So cross cultures is kind of in my DNA. And so I really enjoy meeting and working with different types of people.
So, so tell me about that then. You said you moved to the US when you were 7. So what prompted the move?
Yeah, so my dad's sister actually moved to the US when she got married. And so that was kind of like create a snowball effect of, hey, America's a great place for education. So my dad ended up coming here. He's a machinist. He found a job. He asked us to come over. And the rest is kind of history. That's how we grew up here. We came here in 1979.
And you said holding on to the Urdu that you spoke. So at 7, obviously you've got a good comprehension of the language, but I suppose if you'd stopped there and then you would have lost it. So what were you talking at home? How frequently were you able to continue that? And how did you find, if you can recall, learning that new language?
Well, that's a great question. So funny story. As soon as we landed here in America, we went to, I grew up in Greenville, South Carolina. My dad's rule number 1 in the house was no English in the house. So he was literally learning English at work. And he said, no English in the house, because English is something you're going to pick up outside of the home, right? And I didn't quite understand it at the time, but now I'm so grateful for him because we literally spoke, Urdu and Hindi in the house, and when we were outside, we were learning English. So that allowed us to kind of be, bilingual from that perspective. So, but it was a great rule number one in the house.
Yeah, for sure. It's always a goal of mine to be to try and teach my kids when they're young different languages. Particularly, I think Spanish would be the language that I would teach them. But not being Spanish myself, my fiance does speak it, and she grew up a little bit in Spain, but she's British, so it's not natural to us.
Right, right.
But when it's natural, I suppose, and being bilingual can be such an advantage to your kids and to yourself. But what about that in the sense of then when you went into a kind of global working world, how have you found being able to talk different languages, or just understanding and respecting different cultures to play out?
Yeah, I think, going into the workforce, I think we were well prepared just growing up in the US, the 50 plus states that we have here in the US. As someone who was growing up and learning a language and learning culture at the same time, what I found out was going from South Carolina to New York to California, just traveling around the country exposed me to different cultures just within the United States. So when I did finally get out of college and started working, it was kind of natural for me to meet people from all different parts of the world and even the States and figure out, how do we work together? And I think I'm grateful to my parents, because every summer we would take road trips and go up on the East Coast or anywhere. And at the same time, we were actually learning that there's different cultures out there, even within the United States, right? So it was a great experience, set me up for the corporate world. And then, even beyond now, where just appreciating people and where they come from is a huge, huge part of my life.
For sure. We won't tell the story. We're just doing pre episode about your knowledge of English soccer or football, because that it might go over the head of a few of our audience. But tell me a bit more about your views of your career then. So you grew up in the States. You went to college. What was the idea of where your career would go, and how heavy a part did your parents play in helping you decide what career
it's there's this old stereotypical cliche that if you're from South Asia, you're not successful unless you're a doctor, engineer, or lawyer, right? And so my parents were grateful enough where they just kind of let us figure out what we're really interested in. I think my dad being a machinist, I'm the middle of three brothers, right? So I'm the middle one. And I think I naturally gravitated towards being very hands-on, very mechanical. So I decided to study mechanical engineering. And little did I know that going through school here in the US, we weren't really learning engineering, we were learning how to learn. And so when I did finally start working, I realized that I was taught how to solve problems in university. Now in the real world, we're still solving problems. The only element, a new variable came into play, was people. And so not being the typical stereotypical engineer, I think within 2 years, my boss at the time recognized that I had this natural gravitate. I was gravitating towards learning why people were saying certain things, why were people thinking a certain way, which was not very typical of an engineer. An engineer is like, hey, give me a problem to solve. I'm gonna apply my knowledge and solve it. I was more interested also in not only solving the problem, but solving it in a way that addressed the person's real ask. Like, why are they asking for this? That was kind of like a very early journey of getting into psyche to understand why people ask what they do, why do people behave the way they do. And that started me on that journey of really, the importance of communication and listening, I think.
And where do you think that came from? That kind of,
I think
that was important.
Yeah, I think not to necessarily bring religion into it, but I live very much by my faith. And one of the things is around, principles in my faith is around being more empathetic, being more listening. And so as I was taking like communication classes at work and things like that, it was all reinforcing the fact of the importance of listening. You can actually learn more if you listen before you speak. And so that started, telling me things like, okay, maybe I don't have to be the smartest person in the room, but I have to be smart enough to know that let others kind of voice their opinion, because it may change your perspective of what you're about to ask. And I'm grateful for a couple of bosses early in my career that kind of told me that, hey, sometimes don't just jump right in. We know you're young, you're ambitious, but kind of step back a little bit, see what you can learn from the room, because it may change the question you're about to ask. And that was powerful for me very earlier on.
And I think that's actually a really interesting anecdote, because lots of individuals who are very successful at their job or the tasks that they're set, as they step up into bigger and leadership type roles, feel that they have to be that top performer in terms of their knowledge or their understanding or being the smartest person in the room.
Right.
It's actually a little bit vulnerable to either surround yourself with those people where you're not, or to step back and listen and not try and prove that you are the smartest person in the room. So did that take some adjusting to learn how to do that, or did that come quite naturally to you?
It didn't come natural. I think it was very much an adjustment, because you have this tendency that, hey, if my voice is not heard, then people may have a perception that, hey, this guy's he's tuned out, or he's very passive, or he's not really adding much to the conversation. So it was kind of like, it's like any other muscle, right? I mean, I had to exercise it. I had to, and I always felt like it doesn't matter what job I was in, I was always try to find that one person that could be a mentor for me, to be a sounding board, right? Because you need that, because what's the hardest thing to do is to listen to yourself being recorded, right? And just playing that back over and over again. So it was something that I had to practice, and something that didn't just come natural to me. But as I got better at it, I started seeing the results of speaking less, but when you do speak, collect your thoughts and be very prescriptive on what you're about to say. I've had many people that I interact with even today. They can say 25% less words, but probably be 100% more powerful, right? And I think that's something that takes work. I mean, it takes practice. It doesn't come natural.
For sure. So tell us about your career journey then. So you did you study mechanical engineering at college? I
studied mechanical engineering at Clemson University in South Carolina. While in college, we have what's called co-op program, where it's like an internship type, where we can work while you're in school. So I started working for a German company while I was in school, BASF, and at that earlier on, kind of getting exposed to German culture and American culture very early on while I was in school. Upon graduation, I went full-time with BASF, and I moved from South Carolina to Houston, which in itself was another cultural move. Houston is kind of a melting pot of cultures from all over the world. It's something that I wasn't fully exposed to. And so moving here allowed me to connect with people from Africa, Asia, South America. And as I was working with BASF, after about the third year or so, my boss recognized this whole tendency of me really liking to work with people. And he said, hey, have you ever thought about getting a master's in business, like an MBA, and focusing on like organizational behavior? And it was something that I had not thought about. I thought I was on a technical engineering career ladder. So I took him up on the offer. He said, hey, I'll with the company will fund it. And I'm like, let's do it. So it was a 21-month program. It was a very unique program because it was taught by experts in their fields that were also working professionals. So our accounting class was taught by a CPA. Operations was taught by a chief commercial officer of a company. So that changed my whole perspective after I graduated with the MBA, that, hey, I want to stay somewhat technical, but I want to go into general management and be exposed to different things. And that journey led me to an opportunity at Air Liquide, which was a French company now. So I'm going from German to French, and based out of Houston. I ended up being there almost 15 years. And every couple of years, I noticed that they were putting me in different positions. And it was refreshing. I mean, I started in engineering, went into technical management, started managing people. Then they put me out of my comfort zone and put me in a finance operations type role, where I had an opportunity to work directly with the CEO and understand what the business was doing. Then after that, I went to run my own P&L. So I had a kind of a small business that I was running. So that was a fascinating journey. From there, one of our suppliers was GE, General Electric, and I worked with them very closely and had an opportunity to go work with them And that got me into a commercial, more of a sales opportunity type role. Things were going great there. Then once again, I get pulled up on LinkedIn by a company called Honeywell and had an opportunity to go into product development, product management. Most of these jobs that I went into, they a lot of times were new roles. So it was a kind of a new function that I had an opportunity to establish. After Honeywell, a former CEO that I'd worked with before went to a company called Domatic, and kind of we reached out and started talking. And I went into warehouse industrial automation, got into software at Domatic, which subsequently, I wanted to really get into the C-suite around commercial and sales. So when this opportunity with NovaSource came up as chief commercial officer, it was just right opportunity, right time in my career. Allows me to bring in industry stuff into a new industry and help this company get better.
Excellent. Well, thanks for painting that. I want to roll back a little bit because there's you rolled over something which I think is a really crucial component of your background, which I'd love to explore in a bit more detail. And this is the part you mentioned around when you're working and had the exposure directly with your CEO back at Air Liquide. Could you just explain a bit more about that role? Because to me, when you told me about your experience, it felt like that was a pivotal change in the trajectory of your career. So firstly, what was the role, and then I can pull up in a bit.
Absolutely. So the role at the time was it was called Director of Strategic Planning and Operations Control. Basically, the job had two aspects to it. One was responsible for the strategy, the multi 3-year, 5-year strategy for the company. And then the second half of it was more of, at the time, we had about 5 or 6 different businesses. So each business had a president or a leader of that business, and we all reported into the CEO. So on a monthly basis, my team's job was to, number one, write the story of what happened in each one of these businesses and kind of roll it up to the company level to explain to the CEO and to our board, hey, this is what the company did. These are the areas of the businesses that performed well. These are the areas that haven't. Here's the levers that we're looking at to right some of these things, to course correct some of these things. So at the time, I realized, I'm playing with financial statements, whether it's an income statement, balance sheet, cash flow statements. But at the same time, I'm like, every one of these numbers has a story behind it. There's a reason why a business did well. There's a reason why a business didn't do well. So how do I articulate what's going on in the business, synthesize that? I literally had to produce a 3-page kind of an executive letter that would go out summarizing all this, right? So
3 pages for all the businesses,
all of the business, literally,
okay.
Really, right? So now you're publishing numbers, but then you're publishing a story behind it. So that experience taught me why businesses do certain things and why businesses take certain actions, and how can you preempt some of that. So me being kind of a resource to our CEO, because CEO wants to know, hey, where are we going? Where have we been? What do we need to do based on these market drivers? So he would lean into our team to really understand who we are today. What are we doing well? What do we need to be positioned for the next year, 2 years, 3 months, 6 months? So it forced me to work with, 5 or 6 key presidents of these different businesses, and each one of them almost literally spoke a different language. What I mean by is because the businesses were also different, right? So sometimes the acronyms, the jargon, the language that you're using in different industries, how do you translate all that into something that somebody who's not necessarily familiar with your business can understand it? And that was my early signs of like becoming a storyteller, because now I approach things very differently. It's like when I need to explain something to somebody, the first thing I do is understand the audience. Who am I speaking with? What language will they understand? It's all English, but what I mean is, what terms should I use? What terms should I not use? What approach should I take? And how do I tell this story, whether it's good or bad, right? And so, the basic elements of a story are what? The introduction, the central themes, the key points, and the conclusion. So I try to apply those principles even now when I'm doing a presentation, whether it's to the board or whether it's to even one of my folks, just to say, okay, I want to tell it in a way that they'll understand it.
For sure. And why do you think why do you think you were chosen to run that department? What was because I would, I was going back a few years, but you must have been fairly young, and dealing with senior people in terms of the presidents of these divisions who would have, if they had a bad month, probably, would probably want control of that narrative. And you, as somebody that had been an engineer, now being responsible for that, must have been a big responsibility. So why do you think you were chosen, and how did you deal with that? Is that exposure at an earlier stage of your career?
I actually remember the moment, the experience that went through. I think that was pivotal, and that was, and honestly, I was in my mid 30s probably at the time, right? And so Air Liquide had this leadership development program that they would pick certain individuals who they thought had high potentials, and they would run them through this program. So it was basically 3 modules, 2 weeks at a time, spaced out apart over a span of a year and a half. And the second module, I remember, our vice president of HR came in to do a talk and just kind of sit and listen. And I was very interactive through this whole leadership. Like I started embracing things like conflict resolution, how to negotiate, anything that had to do with people. Like I was very active in these sessions. And so when that second module was over, I got an email from this VP of HR and said, hey, really enjoyed your interaction, really enjoyed your participation, really enjoyed your insights. I didn't even know you're an engineer the way you were talking, right? So can we grab lunch? And so I went to lunch with him, and he told me, hey, I'd like, we were talking about you in a leadership team, and are you open to trying different things outside of your comfort zone? And if you are, that would mean moving around a couple of times here and there. And I said, absolutely. So that's what kind of triggered it.
Wow. So I suppose that is a great reminder that, particularly when you're in a large organization and there are opportunities that could be available, you might not even know that they're there.
Exactly.
But putting yourself out there, showing who you are in any forum, there's always the possibility that something like this could happen. You didn't, right. It wasn't something you signed up for. It wasn't something that you had to throw your hat in the ring for. It was based upon the way you presented. And I think sometimes people forget that actually just the way you show up and how you present yourself can lead to opportunities that you wouldn't even know that door is there.
Yeah.
So I think that's number one. And then secondly, then as somebody in their mid 30s, dealing with, what are very seasoned, I'm sure, presidents of their own businesses, running their own P&Ls, big responsibility. What was that interaction then like, as somebody with the good but probably limited experience that you had at that point, to then go and sit in the room with them and actually be the ones responsible for telling their stories?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because I think now that I think about it, I was probably the youngest one on that leadership team, right? I literally remember I was probably about 35. And one thing that I think it comes back to, your parents, your upbringing and whatever. But I always approached all these guys, and majority of them, I think, were probably in their late 40s, 50s, right? I approached them with a mindset of, I want to learn from them. So I didn't, even though they had to report numbers into me, this and that, I made the effort to go meet with them on their home court, whether it was in their office, whether it was at their site, and just say, hey, look, here's my role. But before I can even do my role, I want to understand and have good understanding of what you do, what's important to you. Once I made it about them, oh my God, everything changed, because now it's all about, they're like, hey, here's a guy that values me, my background and everything. So I spent I invested a lot of time in spending time with each one of these folks and understanding what they do, why they do, what's important to them, and building that rapport. Because one thing I learned was communication and having a level of empathy and building trust are like the pillars of any, if you're going to have success anywhere, it doesn't matter where you are. And I think what folks started understanding, what people started recognizing, these leaders did, that I wasn't coming in there thinking I knew it all. So, and I think that the human tendency works that way, right? If you're approached by somebody and they're approaching it from the angle of, hey, I want to learn from you, you're going to be a lot more receptive, right? versus, hey, I did this in my previous life. Just let me get this from you, and I'll be on my way. That doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't help.
Sure. Understood. Well, thank you for sharing that. I think that's really helpful, and definitely some steps to take. I'm keen to understand when the energy transition energy markets became something that was on your radar of interest to you. I mean, obviously, having worked in BSF, and I assume that's in the kind of chemical space, but there's sort of links to energy in that regard. So engineers always sort of are on the cusp of it. But when did energy become something that you realized was actually an area that you could be interested in, or that led to you joining NovaSource?
Yeah, so energy, it became interesting to me was at Air Liquide. When I was in the operations controllership role, one of our businesses was electricity production. Like we produced electricity, right? And so I had exposure to that business. And just ironically, my next role out of that was running our, what we called cogeneration, which is basically producing electricity and steam, that business for Air Liquide. So I ran that P&L for that business. And that was my first real exposure into the energy markets, particularly in Texas and Europe as well. So that's how I kind of got into the energy space.
Sure, understood. And then, but this was back. When was this?
This was at Air Liquide. Yeah.
So what year would that have been?
This would have been probably around 2010.
Okay. So from a clean energy or renewable energy perspective, how much of a focus or even a conversation was there around that in terms of the business model? Or was this purely all sort of old energy?
Yeah, so this was purely traditional gas power electricity. We weren't into the renewable energy space at all. I started learning about the renewable space when I went to GE. When I went to General Electric, we had natural gas traditional power production, but then GE also had a winds business, so wind turbines and things like that. So I started getting exposure to wind and that energy. But now we're talking about 2015 timeframe, where renewables and the clean energy was just kind of up and coming. People were still skeptical about it. They're skeptical about the reliability of it and so forth. So I kind of knew the clean energy space from there and saw a potential in it. But didn't just dive in directly into renewables at that time.
Sure. And then just before NovaSource, you've mentioned Domatic already. So it'll be good to just finish your career journey through to that. So what was the role of the Domatic, and then we can move on to NovaSource.
Yeah. So my last role at Domatic was quite different. I got into a bit of a software space. So Domatic traditionally is like almost a 200-year-old company, and they basically produce and manufacture all the hardware and software that goes into any distribution center, whether it's an Amazon distribution center, whether it's Next Clothing in Europe. Anybody, when you place an order, comes from some sort of a fulfillment distribution center. So the customer would literally put up 4 walls, and then a company like Domatic would come in and put in all the equipment and software that goes in it. Being an old company like that, I think what we recognized was for us to scale the business, it was going to have to be through software, and we weren't a traditionally software company. So I was offered to kind of take a role of looking at our existing development of software and how do we make that a cloud-based software. So going into next generation of technology. So had the opportunity to work on a partnership with Google Cloud. So we signed a 5-year partnership with Google Cloud. And that gave me exposure to now a high-tech company and how they can help accelerate our software development. So I started, once again, working with a lot of young people at Google out of California. And once again, the communication was a big key here, right? Because, here I'm working with some of the folks in their 20s and 30s that are moving at 100 miles an hour. And how do you translate that work into Domatic, who doesn't move at that space, right? So my task there was to figure out what is the path to developing this next generation software and how we're going to commercialize it and go to market.
I see. Okay. And I would assume then for working with Google Cloud and obviously having the demand from a software perspective that maybe data centers became
Yes.
prominent, or you had some exposure to that, which sort of perhaps ties back into the renewable energy space slightly.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So, probably around 2022 timeframe is when I started really getting exposures to data centers. As I was spending time with Google, they were talking about how many data centers are popping up. I didn't even know what a true data center was. So I started learning more about data centers, the amount of energy they consume, different types of technologies that can provide that energy. And so that became like at my forefront. So when the opportunity with NovaSource came up, I started seeing a big shift in North America on the prediction is not only with data centers, but as AI starts to evolve and more data centers are needed, the capacity is there, but the demand is going to go up quite a bit for power and electricity. So, if you look at some of the industry reports now, it's like the amount of growth that we're going to see in demand for electricity, and if you look at capacity, there's going to be a gap. And I firmly believe that some of that gap, if not large of that gap, can be fulfilled by renewables, by clean energy. And that's what got my interest in NovaSource, is that here's a company that's in that space, and we can make an impact.
So for our listeners who can you break down the business model of NovaSource, and what's the problem that you solve?
Yeah.
Where do you sit in the market? What's the mission behind the company?
Yeah. So basically, if you look at a solar, what they call them utility scale solar power plants, these are like 100 megawatts and higher typically. And so you've got utility scale solar panel plants along with battery energy storage plants. Typically, a company or a private equity or somebody, a developing company will raise funds to build one of these plants. And so once they build it, or part of their building is they have to figure out who's going to maintain it. So they look for companies like NovaSource to be that operations and maintenance and asset management provider that once this plant goes online, that they're going to maintain the asset. So they're going to do all the preventive maintenance, the corrective maintenance, and take care of that asset. So that's what NovaSource does. They step in when a plant goes live, and sometimes even 6 months before, to be that partner that's going to provide this service. So traditionally, NovaSource has been, operations and maintenance. And what that really means is you have boots on the ground that are turning wrenches, that are doing preventive maintenance. The reason I joined NovaSource was our new CEO that came in about a year and a half ago. His vision is to pivot from O&M to operations maintenance to what we call total asset optimization. And what that means is leveraging digital tools and technologies to extract as much energy as you can out of that plant. And it's developing that asset owner mentality. Even though we don't own the plant, we want to service that plant as if it was ours. And I think that mission really resonated with me quite a bit.
For sure. Well, I can see although it's a completely different sector, you can see the similarities to the Domatic project that you were responsible for. But breaking that down then, to be able to provide that total asset optimization, but coming in at the stage that you do, I would assume that maybe you need to get involved a little bit earlier with organizations. And could you tell us about that journey? Because if it's not set up correctly, I'm sure you're not able to provide services. So how does that work?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's a term that's used in our industry called COD, which is commercial on delivery. That's when the plant goes live, right? Leading up to that, there's going to be what we call here in the US EPCs, like an engineering, procurement, a construction company, the company that designs and builds that plant. And what we offer at NovaSource is what we call pre-COD services. So that means 9 months, 8 months before, we can offer and get involved with the company that's building the plant, and we can be partners with them. So we're part of the journey to help them guide on, hey, what you're building, perhaps maybe you should do X, Y, and Z, because to maintain it, it'll be a lot easier, right? So we try to offer and try to get ahead of it at least 6 to 9 months before and get involved in that project earlier on. Because at the end of the day, if we're going to be maintaining it, it's always good to be part of designing and installation, right?
For sure, absolutely. And I think that the innovation in the industry has to come in some part through software and technology, but and the industry is fairly new in the grand scheme of things compared to some of the old fossil fuel plants. But still, I suppose technology is developing at such a pace that actually some of these older plants that might not be that old still need quite a lot of work to then be able to provide this service. So how do you protect that with the ongoing development of technology? Because no doubt the technology that you have access to in 2-3 years time is going to far supersede the technology that you have now. And if these plants are being built for the long term, how do they keep being updated to be able to optimize as best as possible? Or how do you sort of consider that challenge?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So we kind of categorize projects into two types. One I would call brownfield, and those are the ones that have been operational. They've been there for the last 5-6 years, and they could be serviced by NovaSource, or they could be being serviced by one of our peers, right? But so we call them brownfield opportunities. And then you have the greenfield ones that are basically brand new plants that are being developed. And so our strategy now is we're also looking at how can we help these brownfield plants that were built 5-6 years ago that perhaps need some modernization. So we do have offerings where we can help them repower, do some modernization upgrades, whether it's to their telemetry system, to their computer system, to their operating system that they have. Sometimes it's even as simple as hardware, right? New type of wiring, new types of solar panels that have come out. So we do offer that service as well to kind of, I would say, modernize some of the aging assets that are out there.
Sure. So your profile and background clearly is not an out and out renewables individual, but recruiting into this space and working within it, although there are people that are joining the industry now and there's a lot of people that want to, there are a lot of leaders in renewable energy who have always been in renewable energy. Your sort of playbook and background in these other sectors obviously are transferable, but how do you think that sort of outside view of other industries and coming in to a business now at such a senior level helps you when you're faced with these challenges? And is there any hindrance from not knowing the sector as well as some of your peers?
Yeah, I would say it's a little bit of a both, right? I would say for me, some of the benefits have been that it's easy for me to help identify some low-hanging fruit of how we can how can NovaSource become better internally? So there's certain processes and systems that we can put in place to become more efficient in just how we conduct our business day to day. I'll give you a very good example, right? I lead the commercial team. So having worked in this space in other industries, there's different ways how you can have the life cycle of an opportunity. An opportunity gets identified. How do you take that all the way to signing the contract? So we recently just put together a very simple, what we call an opportunity management process, right? And that comes from just experience from other places that says, okay, a company at the size of NovaSource doesn't need all the bells and whistles. We're not big enough to do that. So how do you right size a process that can help us talk to a customer and quickly turn around and get them a proposal, right? Sounds very simple and basic, but you'll be surprised how long it takes some companies to even issue a proposal, right? I think the other piece is in terms of what I don't know about the industry, literally I'm learning that every day from clients, from customers. In my first 2 months at NovaSource, I met with at least 22 customers, both virtually and in person. And that's the best onboarding you can ever do in any industry, is learn directly and hear directly from clients and customers. Once you hear that, then you try to figure out, okay, how much of this can be done today? How much of it is really like, world hunger? I can't solve world hunger, but I can solve some starvation at some level. So that's the approach I usually take, is what can we do things for clients that it's least effort but high impact, right?
Sure. And what about that? Again, it perhaps comes back to the story we were telling earlier about being comfortable to not be the smartest person in the room. But as the service provider supporting your clients, there might be a stigma attached that actually, if you're going to meet your client, you need to know everything because that's why you're the service provider. So maybe a good example to talk through of how do you approach those conversations when it could be deemed that you should know what you're talking about, and maybe you don't because you're learning. So how did you approach that to ensure you got a good outcome?
Yeah. One thing I learned in my time at GE was this idea of a discovery approach. And what that means is when I approach a customer that I've never seen before or met before, I think it's incumbent upon you to do some level of research about that company. So if they're publicly traded, you can get a lot of information. If they're not publicly traded, you can still get decent amount of information. So when I approach them, client, I always try to put a perspective out there that says, hey, I know this is our first meeting. If you allow me, let me just kind of maybe articulate what I think you guys are about, where the problems are. And then you can tell me if I'm completely off base, or am I even in the same stratosphere? Am I in the same planet? And I found out more often than not, when you've taken that approach, the client kind of puts their guard down and says, okay, I've got an opportunity to really tell them who we really are, because this guy's completely off base and all that. So what you avoid there is this whole awkward interaction of, do they really know? From the client's perspective, does this guy even know us? So it's almost like playing offense versus defense, right? I'd rather put myself out there in a vulnerable situation, but put the disclaimer that, hey, this is just my understanding. I'd love for you to course correct me. And when you take that approach, I think I've seen it, the conversation just flows a lot easier.
I think maybe that's just natural human behavior, but I think people prefer telling you you're wrong than you're right. So it's good to kind of show you, well, no, actually that's not the issue we have here. This is the issue. And then you're like, right, great. I can make a note of that and make sure we solve that next. But, but I think it is an important piece because, I talk to a lot of executives. I place a lot of executives who move into new, into new organizations, and a lot of the time moving into new sectors. And handling that and having that confidence, particularly when you've been in one sector for a long time in your career and you move new company, new sector, how do you approach that? So I think that's a really good, a good lesson to talk about. Let's talk a bit more about your own style and leadership and philosophies around that, because we've spoken a lot about kind of up in the organization, but I'd like to know more about down. So firstly, the commercial function within NovaSource that you are responsible for. Would you mind just painting a picture of what does that actually entail? What are the kind of distinct functions that sit within it?
Yeah, so as a chief commercial officer, I've got a few different areas on my team. One is obviously around sales and business development. It's growing the company's top line revenue. The other piece I would say is I own partnerships. So we try to do a lot of stuff through partnership, through original equipment manufacturers and other technology providers, for example. So I kind of own the partnership from a commercial perspective. So if we want to do business with someone, whether they're operational or technical, my team usually will get involved in, at least from how do we commercially put this agreement together to work with them, And I think the other piece of mine is I own marketing and communications as well. So all the marketing and communications for NovaSource is on my team as well, both internal and external marketing. So that kind of gives you exposure. NovaSource is owned by private equity, so we do report to a board. So just that communication, managing that communication as well. And then the last piece I would say is around M&A. Any M&A type opportunities, we take a look at those as well.
For sure. So tell me a bit about kind of forming that team. Obviously, you've walked into a team that's already been formed, and whether that's something that you have to kind of evolve and adapt. But when you're looking at a team dynamic, when you come in at an executive level, how do you assess the team? How do you take the culture from where it perhaps is to where you want it to get to? What's your approach to ensuring you have a high performing team under you?
That's a really interesting question. So when I joined NovaSource back in April, I came into a situation where several folks had recently left on my team, sales account managers, and then NovaSource had already hired some as well. So when I came in, I had a team. So for me, it was more of a couple of things. It's number one, assessing the skill set of the team, but then also trying to find a way to build chemistry within the team as well. And it wasn't that easy. I mean, I would say even in the first month or two, had a couple of folks that left the company as well. So trying to backfill those as well. But one of the things I did was I kind of held a kind of a commercial summit, a kind of a 2-day workshop that in our head office in Phoenix, and it was an opportunity to bring everyone together. And we did a lot of these exercises around getting to know each other. And I always do this exercise called About Me, where you have a white page. You can put whatever you want on it, but you can't really write any words. So you have to tell about yourself through either figures or drawings or whatever. And that exercise really kind of opened up people to understand, where they're coming from, what's important to them, what do they value. So I think after those 2 days, the team started feeling a little bit better about, who each other was and why do certain people act the way they act, but then I started morphing more into something that I'm really big on is empowerment with a sense of accountability. Especially for my direct reports, I expect a high level of excellence out of them, but at the same time, I expect them to be empowered to do what they need to do, knowing that accountability is there, right? So I think if you have those two ingredients, what they usually translate into is trust. And if you have all three of those, it makes your life a lot easier, and people will just excel.
For sure. And there's two parts of team formation. There's, of course, having a current team and taking them on that journey, but also then when you're hiring individuals to join the team that you've created or are creating, there's something there. If you were to summarize maybe 2 or 3 of the top traits that you believe you look for in any role, what would they be, and how do you typically test for them or look out for them in a process?
I apply this HHS principle, right? It's hungry, humble, and smart. Now, what I mean by that is, I think everybody has some level of intellect, but if you've got enough, I would say, EQ and IQ, emotional, intelligence and intellectual intelligence, and you combine that with some level of humility, and you've got a drive. To me, those 3 ingredients have been proven well, because now you've got an individual that has some passion behind what they're doing. They do it with no level of arrogance, but they do it in a way that, hey, this is an opportunity for me to learn something more, and they've got the either the intelligence or the smartness, and if they don't, they're willing to learn, right? So I think that's kind of the ingredients I use when I'm looking at somebody to hire.
And how do you actually find that out? Because it's one thing to know what you want to look for, but another to make sure that people aren't just saying what you want to hear, or they've got this mask on at interview stage. I'm sure you've made some wrong hires over the years. Everybody has, but what do you try and do to minimize that risk?
I think a lot of it is, when you're talking to individuals, just seeing their choice of words, right? You'll have certain individuals that'll say, hey, I did this, I did that, I contributed this, where others might take an approach that says, hey, I worked on this with my team, and as a team, we did this, right? And others may take the approach of, when you ask them, hey, what was your approach in solving a tough problem with an individual, like an individual that you didn't really like for whatever reason, but you had to work with them, right? How did you take that approach? I think that answer you'll probably tell you a lot about how that person thinks. Because I'm telling you, I've been around people in the workplace that says, I will not work with that individual. Like they'll openly say it, like, you know what, like I can't work with that individual. And then you'll have others that'll say, you know what, not to quote this new book by Mel Robbins, but there's a new book that she came out with called the Let Them Be Theory, right? And if you read that book, it's all about, there's certain individuals you just have to let them be. Like you're not there to change who they are. You kind of let them be, and you stand firm on who you are. And guess what? At some point, they're gonna recognize it. They're gonna recognize that, Josh or Irfan, like they're pretty firm on their principles. Like, I'm not going to shake them, right? And you can do that in a very professional and in a nice way without necessarily, being confrontational, right? So asking some of those types of questions that, hey, what was one of the toughest things that you had to go through, and how did you overcome it? Sounds like an easy question, but if you look at the way the individual responds, tells you a lot, I think.
For sure. And then lastly, the team that you're forming is obviously a commercial team, or a team that's thinking about the top line revenue growth, but doing so in an organization that's and an industry that, of course, is well known to have lots of challenges right now in terms of the current administration and some of the headwinds that we're facing, shall we say. So balancing the commercial side with a business model that's sustainable and a kind of solution that's in the sustainability field can be a bit of a paradox anyway. But when you do it then into an environment that we're in right now, which makes it even more challenging, must be quite hard to get the balance right. So as the leader of that function, how do you get the balance right between, the sales acumen and focus on actually closing contracts and getting that done, with the being passionate enough about the sector to understand and really believe in it, but then not to get so demotivated with the current landscape? There's a lot of moving parts there that, as the head of that function, I suppose you're having to deal with. How do you set that right culture and mentality with your team to deal with all of these different challenges that are faced?
Well, the first thing I had to do was, especially here in the U.S., with the passing of the Big Beautiful Bill, which really took out a lot of tax incentives especially for solar plants, for sure. One thing I had to do was, number one, understand the implications of this new legislation that just passed, right? And then figure out, okay, we don't build plants. NovaSource doesn't build these plants. We service them, right? So when we started looking at the market, to your earlier point, there are a lot of plants that were put in 6-7 years ago that are running today that will need to be serviced. So from a service provider perspective, we pivoted now to say, okay, how can we help the new projects that clients have, accelerate them to kind of take advantage of these tax incentives and over the next couple of years? But at the same time, how can we get re-engaged with some new clients that have assets that have been running, and how can we help them? So we had to pivot our approach. I would say earlier this year, the approach was heavy on new projects, getting new customers online. Now it's almost like 50-50 on how can we help the existing plants that are out there, whether it's through technology, whether it's through new servicing type offerings that we have. So we're going after the existing install base, and there's plenty of it to go after.
Yes, for sure. And that's the conversation that I have a lot with individuals is, yes, these changes are are tough to accept at sometimes, and given the landscape and where it was going, feel like they can be needed. But actually, business models do need to stand independently. And the one good thing out of this is it will force organizations to think really commercially about the opportunity. And if you can create the opportunity without the credits or other areas that will help you, then you're creating a business model that's extremely resilient and actually, can stand the test of time, right, not being propped up with something else. So yes, it's been tough to accept, but I think actually the businesses that survive this and move forward will be thriving in the future with more resilience, better business models, and actually something that can be the sustained organizations in this space that we really need to plug that gap that the demands will create. So I don't think it's I think it's not great for the industry, but actually I think when we look back on it, maybe in 3 or 4 years, as businesses become more resilient, I think it could be a really good thing. And definitely the commercial team is going to play a big part in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing that also I try to really focus on is, by all industry reports, NovaSource is the largest O&M provider. We have over 30 gigawatts of assets that we maintain. But to me, that comes with responsibility. And I think that responsibility is really around how can we be leaders of trying to find a way to optimize these assets like I talked about, versus just providing maintenance services, right? So I think if we do this right, because bigger isn't always better. I'm telling you, right? It's all about if we truly are the biggest O&M providers, then how can we take that responsibility and help clients to really help get the most out of their assets? I think that's a responsibility that we have, and that's what I'm trying to instill here at the company.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for that. To end our part of this conversation then, if there was one thing that could give you the most kind of hope and optimism for the future of the renewable energy space, what would you say it is?
I think the hope is, we live in a world that's got ebb and flows, right? Things go up, things go down. But at the end of the day, one thing that's constant is population is growing. The energy demand is going to continue to grow exponentially, especially through technology like data centers and things like that. And I strongly feel that the world is big enough, the opportunity is big enough where every type of energy source is going to have a role to play. I think renewables has a role to play. Traditional power has a role to play. And we just have to figure out that right balance, because I think it's a team sport. That's the way I look at it. There's no one particular energy technology that's going to come out on top. I don't believe in that. I think there's a place for all these. And the thing I'm hopeful about is clean energy is exactly what it says, right? It's better for the environment. We can work through the technology challenges, but at the same time, I think it has a role to play.
For sure, absolutely. And I think your skill set at the intersection of technology and energy will be pivotal for the future. So I've got some quick fire questions to wrap up with, and if we can run through these quickly. So if there was one book that you think every leader should read, what would you recommend?
Oh man, I would say one of my favorite books is the Culture Map by Aaron Meyer. It really changed my perspective on how culture is not something that's black or white. There's a scale to it, and it varies from country to country. And she lays a very nice little the way she lays it out. It helps you appreciate different cultures.
Excellent. What's a skill that you're currently working on?
I'm telling you, the skill that I always constantly work on is listening and speaking with brevity, like really trying to hone in on my words and using less words to communicate a powerful thought.
Yeah, I probably should be practicing that a few more times, but it's tough when you're running a podcast and you're talking every single day. Who's a leader that you most admire?
There's an old book that came out by a guy named Michael Hart, where he ranked the 100 most influential individuals in the history of the world. And to me, the number one person in that list is Muhammad. So when I studied the life of Prophet Muhammad, it's the blueprint for leadership. I mean, this individual was a leader at home, leader in the business, leader at the state level, leader. I mean, it's some of the principles that you learn from his life, his biography, and there's multiple biographies. It's amazing.
What's the most underestimated trait of a successful leader?
I think the most underestimated trait is level of patience. I think, for a leader to be really effective requires a huge bottle of patience, and you can't make sure. And as a leader, you got to make sure when that bottle is running out of patience that you refill it, because you don't want to go empty on patience, because people will test you, life will test you, circumstances will test you, and patience is something I think will helps you get through it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. You published a leadership reflection journal, which we have to plug. What's one main lesson from going through that process?
My biggest lesson, my favorite lesson, and my kids hate this because I talk about it all the time, is wake up every morning with a sense of gratitude. Like, simple. The first thing when you wake up in the morning, the fact that you woke up, have a sense of gratitude, and then just watch how the rest of your day is amazing.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
The best piece of advice I ever received, I would say, is
Alvin Powell. It's our 2000.
Approach people with empathy. That's been a life-changing thing for me, is approaching everyone with empathy, even quote unquote your worst enemy. Like, at the end of the day, the common denominator we all have is that we're human beings, and every human being has different levels of emotions. But I can tell you, when you approach somebody with empathy, you can just physically see the change in that person, right? And then you can work through whatever problems you have.
And then lastly, what's one thing that you're deeply curious about right now?
I'm deeply curious about right now is, and honestly is when we, AI is a buzzword, right? What I'm deeply curious about is the impact of AI as I think about the next generation. I mean, we really didn't get into it, but I'm heavily into education of kids and stuff. So for me, it's important to see how AI is going to impact the learning process for the kids that are being born today, right? I mean, when my kids are older, but they were screen time kids. Now these are going to be like AI type kids, right? And so that's I'm very curious about how that's going to play out.
Yeah, we're big on that in our household. I mean, for my stepson Oscar, we uh, and not in any great detail, but he's getting to the point of maths now where he's learning about algebra, and I was trying to articulate what is algebra, and we went down this AI route, and it just created simple 6 lessons for me to teach him algebra, which were just transformative in the way that we were able to do that. And we were then starting to talk to him and his school about how are they going to use this, and almost creating these one-to-one tutors that will give kids so much better development. Of course, you have to think about how is it used ethically and effectively, but the ability to practice and to get that constant feedback, if it's used and harnessed correctly, I think is going to be fantastic for them. But it does need to be done in the right way. So
great example, good example.
So lastly, the podcast is about people's leadership journeys, and how how they lead with purpose. From your career, who would you say is a standout leader that you would like to hear this type of journey from them about, and their principles and philosophies on leadership?
Oh man, I would say there's a couple, but just as a recent example, I would say my last manager at Domatic. She was the chief technology officer at Domatic, and she is where I learned the power. I used to joke with her all the time. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to call you Calm Power from now on, like CALM. And she's like, why? I said, I've seen you in a room, and she's the only female in the room, and I've seen her literally not say much, but when she did say it, they were powerful. And she kept quiet during times where, people were attacking not her, but the business, right? The business she's running. Like, this is not right. That's not wrong. How come this is late? And she's got this power of really listening, like truly listening, not just hearing, and then articulating a response back that is so factually driven and data driven that you can't even argue with it. Right. And she taught me, I'm still learning that, but I learned that a lot from her, that when she spoke, she didn't spoke with just an opinion. Like, she spoke because she had the facts behind it, and no one can argue with data. So I've seen her go up against people that were perceived to be like the toughest guys in Domatic, and she didn't blink. She didn't blink.
Calm Power. I like
Calm
that.
Power. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. So Irfan, when you eventually step back and you look back at your career, what do you hope your legacy will be in this space, in this world, to know that you've left the world better than you found it?
It's interesting. I love the title of your podcast, because I've worked at like at least 6 different companies, and every job that I left, I always look back and say, hey, did I leave that space better than when I inherited it, right? And so for me, legacy wise, is if I look back, if I was to even help 1 or 2 individuals, whether it's their career, whether I made the company better, I think certain KPIs are measurable, like profitability, all that stuff's measured. But I wanted to be a person that actually impacted people and made people more motivated, unleash things out of people that perhaps they didn't think they had. And so that's the legacy I want to leave, is that I made a positive impact on people. Because if you can do that, that carries over in generations, right? Even today, I do life and career coaching for, folks in their 20s and 30s. And it's all about impacting that one person, because that can impact a generation.
For sure, absolutely. Well, I look forward to tracking that mission, and I'm sure you've already had that type of impact on so many people, and I'm sure you'll continue to do so. But look, thank you so much for your time today. It's been wonderful to share your story, hear the journey. I think a really unique one, but one with so many lessons that we could all take away. So really appreciate you being so open and sharing. Thank you so much for that. And if people have listened and they're inspired by what you say, or keen to reach out and engage with you in some capacity, are you happy to do so? And if so, where should they go to find you?
Oh man, you're gonna make me embarrassed now. So I don't have any social media except for LinkedIn. I am on LinkedIn and my email address, right? BHARDEI@yahoo.com. I'm a pretty simple guy.
Sure, excellent. Well, I'm sure you'll get a few reach out to
All right.
you on that. But look, thank you so much for your time. It's been great. I look forward to hearing how things go with NovaSource and how you can create that business for the future. And I've no doubt you'll be successful. But thanks for coming on, and we'll catch up soon.
Thank you, Josh. It was a pleasure. Enjoyed it.
All the best. Irfan's story is a powerful lesson in the art of translation. His journey shows the most effective leaders are those who can move between different worlds, whether it's different cultures, different industries, or the gap between a technical team and a board of directors, and translate complexity into a simple, compelling story. What stands out to me is his outsider's advantage by bringing a mature playbook from industries like software and robotics to the solar and O&M space. He's not just improving the company, but he's helping to mature the entire industry. And it's a reminder that some of the most impactful changes come from applying proven wisdom in a new context. And that's a profound way to leave an industry better than you found it. So thank you very much for listening. If you're keen to hear more about Irfan and NovaSource Power Services work, then please reach out to him directly. And if you found today's conversation insightful or inspiring, then please share it with a colleague or a friend. Subscribe to the podcast is the best way to keep the conversation going. And until next time, thank you for making the world better than you found it.
Thank you for listening to Better Than We Found It. These conversations are a powerful reminder that while emerging technology is crucial, having leaders with the conviction and resilience to see it through is the only way we will deliver what is required. This podcast is powered by GS2, where our mission is to build the leadership teams that are shaping the future. I'm your host, Josh Huggins, and the conversation doesn't need to end here. Please connect with me on LinkedIn to continue the discussion. And if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the show so you never miss what's next. And until next time, let's all work to leave our world a little better than we found it.